Struggling to break my addictions, smoking. I still have the pipe around, but it's empty. I'm still smoking, but not nearly as much. And my video game have actually made this slower going than faster. You would think, well, at least with the video game I would be showing up more. Today I ended up sleeping most of the day, being depressive, going out and doing some stuff that needed to get done. Anyway, nothing too exciting on the events. We had Austrian inflation and a revolt down in Greece, which, you know, the Turks can more or less ignore, right? That's kind of the issue. As long as they don't have an army, they kind of have to. The commercial phase, things have shaken up quite a bit. The large number of ships the Dutch have lost meant they weren't able to do the high competition. They still paid out the most, but also their loss in prestige location due to the naval defeats has put them in a position where they were having to go first. So everyone ran away from them, getting their own incomes in. So they're able to get a couple of prestige off their shipping still, and they had enough money to rebuild all their boats and even take a shot on a new boat. English expanded their commerce. They're up to a 5 now, hoping to fill in some of the gaps. And the Spanish spent on gaining prestige rather than increasing their shipping. Basically, the English were able to do both. That puts us, I guess, to the diplomatic side of things, and I don't think anything too exciting is happening anymore. The only real question is, Sweden and Russia, you know, can they come to some sort of agreement as to what can happen? The Dutch war, that isn't going to end until Holland falls. Not a matter of what the Dutch want, it's what the English want. And in fact, the English Navy may well involve themselves in grabbing New York. I noticed I had screwed up. I had Dutch traders down here. That's English exclusive zone now, I think. The Carolina space, I think it's that. It may be Virginia. Who the hell knows? I can't read. I think it's Charleston there. Looks like Charleston. And the New Orleans space are both owned by England, so the Dutch couldn't be there. They had been shipping cotton. They can't do that under these circumstances. So I had to move that ship out of there. Of course, that also means the English tax it, so they get less money for their own corporation that way. And I'm not sure which way the English want to fall on that, but having the exclusive does seem more valuable in times when there's a lot of merchants out there. And I don't think they want to pull back from it. The only reason they kind of do is to avoid the creation of the United States. Looking over the rules, I'm not sure a surrender can be refused. I thought either side could. Like with compromise, you know, the side proposing it can't refuse it, right? Well, actually in surrender, it's the side proposing who has the right to refuse. In this case, A can propose a surrender to B, because B controls Zealand, and pieces, there's a demand request, and then A, the initiator, has the right to refuse the surrender. But essentially, you can't demand an unconditional surrender type situation. That's a little different than I expected from the game, and a little different from what you see in EU, where as long as you haven't sat at bad stability for 2 turns, 3 turns, I don't remember which, in a row, you're able to resist the peace demands. Here, well, here's the point. You've already made, as long as you've already not sat at the worst stability for a couple turns, you can resist the surrender demand, the surrender itself. So it's not like the peace demands are being resisted. You can still do that here, but somebody who makes a valid surrender, you have to accept what they're doing. So I think we're going to see that from the Dutch because they want to get out of this. And as a matter of fact, I think the Swedes may as well. I got to figure this out. Doing the peace in this game Maybe because of lack of familiarity, but it's very, very difficult for me. It requires a lot of contemplation in a way that I don't think any other game ever has, because you have to actually formulate the entire peace treaty before the other side gets a chance to say yes or no to it. But in this case, I think the Dutch are willing to give up Zealand, as it were. That's what they're going to have to do. We ended up with a pretty minor peace there, actually. Oldenburg went to Prussia rather than Zealand. That leaves England still this casus belli over Zealand, which is fine. But they weren't able to come up with much more. They could only get one land demand because they had 2 territories. You can only take half the territory you've captured. And they have one other demand, which they took Denmark going over to Spain alliance-wise. England got nothing out of this, basically. And then on the other side, the Swedes and the Russians formalized what's obvious, which is that Karelia is going to fall. Again, unless the Russians have a navy, they're not going to be able to invade Sweden. Unless the Swedes get kind of lucky, they're not going to be able to take Finland back, right? The naval invasion would be very difficult, and then they'd be facing many, many more troops. Whatever landing they make would be very, very hard. Charles XII was able to launch things out of the Baltic states. We don't have that opportunity right now. There's not a whole coastline available to us. We'd do better, perhaps, against Poland, but honestly, there just isn't much that the Swedes can take at this point in the game. I wonder what that was. Anyway. That moves us on. We have attempts on the miners, etc., to go on. But essentially, we're moving into a period of general peace again, I guess. It's the end of the 1701 turn. Not a lot happened. Just sort of a repositioning of the forces. The army's trying to build up, but, you know, it's tough when you're hosed. France, for example, with their huge 70 public debt, that's costing them 14 of their $24 a turn to pay. What else is costing them? Well, they built a couple of units that put them up to 18. I'm trying to figure out why they weren't able to. Oh, the pensions. Yeah, $6 in pensions this turn. That's a killer. They've got to get rid of that. And they probably want to move to free trade. Of course, that costs them a point of prestige, and they're gaining so few points. They're just. It's almost as though the game is sort of decided among the who are going to be the winning powers. So, for example, Holland at 455, they're going to be in the top rank no matter what because of how well they did early on. Poland at 413, possible challenge. Now, Turkey's down to 389, actually. So they're no longer as scary as they were. They've lost a lot of what they gained. Anyway, we're going into a peace turn this next turn, and we're going to see, you know, some of these big navies growing back up, and also players are going to get a chance to retire debt. But man, that's painful. So France, for example, France can only spend 2 prestige points on retiring debt, which isn't going to get rid of a lot of that debt. The people who have built up a large debt are in trouble. People with smaller debts, not so big a deal, but Austria, France, these countries are in really big trouble. Spain's okay with their 40 debt because they make a lot of money, and they don't have the ability to build a big army all at once. I forgot to roll for the Portuguese here, and I forgot to pull these Dutch out, which God knows where they are. Yeah, and with the Dutch at such a high value, they're going to get picked at again. We're going to take a turn of peace, but yeah, the next war is going to be about dragging the Dutch down again. And the question is, who else is going to be involved? Russia's probably going to pick off Finland. There's just not much Sweden can do about it after they've been hit. That's kind of... Unlike, say, empires in arms, and certain EU has definitely this flavor of once a country's in decline, it's kind of permanently in decline, and the in decline countries are more or less historically determined. Here it's not really that way. Here, for example, Poland is kind of scary big. Maybe the events of the scenarios that allow Poland to fall apart or help them fall apart will help bring them down. But Poland's kind of a scary situation, and they're afraid to cancel the Liberum Veto because that will create free casus belli for, you know, everybody around them. Some cost in terms of canceling the alliance that people have with Poland. But right now, Poland is, you know, in that top rank. They're over 400, and the only other person who is Holland. So now there's kind of this, all right, what do we do about Poland? And Russia's very happy about that because Poland's sitting on territory that Russia's very interested in. Eastern Poland, not only do they hold territory that is Russian and the Baltic territory that is desirable, but also Eastern Poland's desirable. So for Russia to reach its historic boundaries, it has to take Poland largely out of the game. And with Poland in the lead, well, there's some appeal. Austria's interested in Galicia. I think actually... Oops. Poland had enough cash. They built that. I thought I remembered that being in there. Okay. You know, Prussia's interested in hooking up East Prussia. So there's a lot of people who have desires on Poland. And hey, if they're in the lead, might as well carve them up. I'm sure a little later, there's, if not already, there's going to be rules that allow you to absorb all of Poland. Unlike Holland, which I couldn't find the rules that prevent you from absorbing capitals, but I know they're in here somewhere because I know it was a special case that Vienna could fall. Anyway, on to the piece. You know, after the random events, there was a remix. But then we ended up with native attack over in New Orleans, which doesn't mean much. It cost the English some of their prestige, a couple points. Russia got inflation, no biggie there. Russia chose to start taxing. And both they and Sweden are pocketing their taxes into the company treasury. Sweden largely because they really don't think they can do anything anymore. Unless they can gain Norway, that's about the only thing they can do, is go to war with the Danes. And what they have to do for that, well, they have to find who has Denmark. That's the Spaniards. And they can kind of try to align themselves in an anti-Spanish alliance if one starts to form. The one that might start to form, though, isn't a pleasant sounding thing. It's things like Holland, which is worried about their own survival. And maybe France, who has claims on Spain that are unresolved, and they would like to start exercising them. Holland looks like a hopeless case in terms of being able to do much militarily. They're going to be at war in this next turn, and it just doesn't seem like a value to go after to help to try to be aligned to that. And France is truly hopeless until they get their economy in shape and have an army. In terms of the mercantile aspects of the game, well, the Dutch are kicking ass. They weren't able to spend the 39, but they spent the double. Oh, no. Crap. Yeah. All right, I've got to fix that. I rolled it as though they did the 39. But they did spend the double, and in fact, the Spanish were able to spend double as well, pushing them above England, who had a higher commercial structure than they do. Both England and Spain added to their commercial structure this turn. They also, I accidentally decreased their commercial structure, which I'll have to fix. Almost all of the ports have been filled. We have, let's see, a Spanish one was up in this serial, and the English access one, geez, I don't remember where it was. I think it was in this art. So the markets are filling up. The question is, well, when the Dutch finally get enough shipping in place, and they've got a bunch more ships coming in, that they can hit that 39 and they can start doing the high competition. Then they'll start decreasing their enemies. It's really hard. You can't impose a no trade type condition on people in this game. The best you can do is force them to open up to free trade. Anyway, we'll hit the diplomacy. I'm expecting this to break out into war again. Possibility of a war against Poland. Like I said, the Russians really want that. I don't know if anybody else does. And everybody wants to take Holland down. They're too far in the lead. We have to keep knocking their points back. And the only way to do that is just keep beating them in wars. Since this is a peace turn, all the revolts are going to clear up, including the new one. But, well, maybe there'll be a new one next turn. All right, I'll fix those. A casus belli in and of itself is no a certain thing, but in fact it's a very unlikely thing. You only have a 1/3 chance of starting a war, which is probably the one thing that keeps the game from being constantly in war. Unfortunately, in this case, both England and Russia got their casus belli off. Now, things are kind of complicated because I screwed up with Spain. The Spanish alliance with England and Prussia was essentially broken. I think before the war even started last time, like I screwed up here. Spanish succession happened in 1698. The war there started the next year, and it shouldn't have, because the Spanish couldn't have entered an alliance at that point outside of their Austrian alliance. Okay, forget about that, I mean, I'm going to screw some things up, clearly. But anyway, Spain's not part of the alliance anymore, that's for certain. Spain is part of the Austrian alliance, and the Austrian-Polish alliance is sort of broken by Russia declaring war on Poland. However, the signatories should still have a right to prevent that kind of aggression, right? So, even though I don't think it's spelled out properly in the rules that way, Poland called on their allies. They're the aggrieved person here, and their allies came in which case that's Austria and Spain. And that brings a lot of the German states in, things like Bavaria. And of course, Saxony is an automatic increase based on the crown being Augustus the Strong. Now, that situation could be ended, but Poland hasn't been beaten yet. There's another situation where, I'm trying to remember what territories it is, but Patkul can be knocked out of Poland as well. That's in the special rules. I have to look to see, for this scenario, I have to look to see how that applies. But if I forget it, I forget it. No biggie. Anyway, a lot of the powers came into play. So England and Prussia are taking on the Dutch, and the Dutch don't have a lot of allies, and they're going to be a problem. This is a peace turn, though, so during our royal phase, a lot of the problems are going to clear up. These revolts and everything, they're just going to disappear. They're not in play, because this is... They disappear during a general peace turn, and in fact these guys are too. I've got to take care of the income and all that, and the effects of them are going to damage the income situation, but then we pull back and we go to the turn, and we don't know how long this peace is going to last. If it lasts 20 years or something, it'll get us outside the extension of this scenario. Now this scenario has special rules which I'm not playing with, which define that every general peace turn is only going to be 1 year. That's because this was such a condensed and important era. You had the Spanish War, you also had the Great Northern War, both at the same time here. I feel that enforcing that within the grand campaigns is a little... I don't know, it just feels wrong. I'm going to be making these decisions as I go, kind of at random. The grand campaign's just not well defined in this game. I think actually you just ignore all the scenario rules is kind of the point. So the way I've kind of gone off the rails in terms of the rules is not terribly well defined, but I think it provides for a better look at the historical situation than the way the game seems to be written. All right, onward. As I work my way through the economics, an interesting factor. Turkey owed a ton of money, $22, to other powers. Let me actually reduce this effect. And they were at a low enough prestige that a bankruptcy, which would drop them 5 prestige points, would put them to less than 5, which is illegal, right? You can only make a choice that drops you less than 5, the way I understand the rules, if you're forced to. Otherwise, of course, the game can't continue if you're forced to make both choices. Now, they were not forced to. So they took out $20 in loans, which puts them in serious problem. It should be 35, not 40. Oh, wait. 15, I took out 20. Yeah, 35. All right. A $35 loan means they're going to be paying $7 in interest every turn. Now, they can do that. They have $14 of revenue. They could demobilize their army if need be or whatever. In this case, they don't have to go that far. But they do not have a choice. They can't simply fall back on the, hell, I'm not going to pay it, which is actually what I was thinking they were going to do. And I may have done with other countries. But no, that shouldn't be an option. If you can physically pay the loan, you must, if you're in this particular situation. If it knocks you back to 0, you know, if you're in a situation where you're going to fall below 5 no matter what, or you're already below 5, it doesn't hurt you. You can declare the bankruptcy and you know, suffer. But in this particular case, there was no choice. The government was not allowed to default on these debts. All right. I want to do that one first. I actually did the English first, but because that drops money into Poland and Russia and Austria's coffers, which allow them to make their decisions more rationally. And remember, this money can't be used to retire their own debts because you don't pay off debts that way. You pay them off with prestige. So that's one of the weirdest things in this system. Okay, small mistake. Revolts don't just disappear, they do become unrest during a peace turn. And then only one unrest per year of the peace turn can go away. Chances are they're all going to go away, but it does kind of affect things where there's a potential for the war to be entered into with the nations not fully in good shape. I don't know what it matters that a minor's in unrest, but that... oh wait, that was a devastation, not an unrest. Okay. So we had countries trying to retire their debt, but not trying very hard. Turkey and France both managed to get some of theirs out of the way. I think Holland did not. Russia got some of theirs out of the way. The big money, though, you know, France is at 65 now, which means $13 a turn. It's still the majority of their money is going into servicing the debt. And it's very, very hard because politically, fixing the debt problem means making choices that are difficult for the country, thereby affecting their prestige. If you can drop it a little bit, you get some chance to reduce your debt a little bit, but you really have to take a hard smack on your prestige, a smack too big for countries that have just come out of a losing war, to be able to start retiring more than just $5 a peace turn. And most turns haven't been peace turns, right? Most turns, the world's too ugly for the countries to become concerned with getting rid of their debt. What that does is it's putting these countries that are in significant debt in a permanent loser position. They can't do much. They can't build up the big armies. I mean, France is still as powerful as, say, Spain is. Spain doesn't have much of a... Spain has a debt problem of their own, but in their situation, France is a potent country, but in terms of the game, France should be the mighty power on the continent. They just have been humiliated a couple of times too many and haven't been able, you know, they've been put in a position where they cannot recuperate, really. And that means they can't really intervene in the sense that they'd like to. The only thing that changes that is that France is doing so poorly in the score because of those humiliations that people aren't necessarily interested in stomping on them anymore. And of course, sometimes when you do stomp on somebody, like Russia trying to stomp on Poland, it doesn't go the way you expect. Lots of the world come against you. And, you know, for next turn then, the question is, hey, where does Turkey feel about all this? Turkey's got a big, lousy, feudal army they can bring into play at in any conflict. And they have gripes against both Austria, who's in this war, and Russia. Not so much against Poland. They won Poldavia, but it's not to the same extent as one of these two large principalities. 1 year passed, so not a lot of effort, not a lot of ability to recover for the countries that are having some economic difficulties. I'd say right now things look pretty bad for the Russians having entered this war. They just brought too much trouble in on their side. Actually, some of the countries like Spain aren't pushing their forces, and Austria aren't pushing their forces forward, although they have sent the Danes up to help out. But basically, they're not willing to throw a lot of weight at Poland at this point. They'd rather see the Polish take a little bit of damage, take some prestige hits, if possible, before they enter the war fully. They're technically at war, but don't particularly want to help Poland because Poland's in the number 2 place here. Of course, Holland is just going to be continuously picked on as long as their score stays high. We got some leveling here. Poor France. Being in a situation like France's isn't necessarily a defense. It means that nobody's out to hunt you, but France is expected to be driving a lot of the game, being one of 2 major powers historically, so they're going to have goals for the scenarios. Again, maybe a problem with me putting these scenario constraints into place. The same kind of issue comes up in EU, as opposed to just saying, hey, it's all free, you know. The decisions are just going to be an end-of-game kind of positioning. There's different philosophies there, but I like games to have some historical basis, and something this long is going to just fly off and make very little sense. The way, honestly, although I love the game, the old Empires of the Middle Ages, if you take a look at that one, has a tendency to, you know, just become ridiculous. In fact, that one has a severe imbalance baked into it in terms of the Byzantines being off on their own little corner and a very rich corner, and able to just accumulate enough money that nobody can ever affect them, so they continually remain powerful. Now that's a game, though, where the only thing that matters is the end position. You don't gain glory each turn or anything like that. So hoarding makes more sense in that kind of design, because there's no real reason to come forward and try to do impressive things in the midterm. You just want to hold your territory that's worth holding. I noticed the increased demand marker that I had out there kind of at the last possible moment where I could fix things, and managed to do so. It meant that the English didn't go back for having the Spanish supersede them. The English ended up being able to pay their double payment out. But the Dutch went after the English hard, and with all the open space here, it's very easy to make money in this game, but not if somebody's competing with you everywhere they possibly can, and that's what the Dutch are doing. And then they did a high competition because they had so much money, which didn't end up knocking anything down. They managed, both Spain and Holland managed to try to buy new boats. Holland got one over there, and they'll be increasing their share of, you know, the total world market. They don't really have to worry. They can make that 3 times very easily, assuming that their merchants don't get all shot up by the English during this war. So last time we had a pretty tough job. You know, over the last couple of turns, we've had a tough job because the Dutch ships haven't been all on play. Now they're finally all in play with the increased demand, etc. We had humongous amounts of money to throw into play, and I don't think I gave them all the money they should have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, 12, 13. I owe them like 13 more bucks. They were in the 40s anyhow. And so they've got a good reserve of cash sitting here. Corporate money doesn't disappear except as you use it. Unlike national treasuries, which sort of wither away, the corporate treasury stays there, so you get to use it again and again and again. I think that sounds kind of ridiculous, so I wanted to clarify it. I went away. When I say again and again, I mean the money stays there if you don't spend it. So if you spend it on trying to build boats, or if you pay out dividends or whatever, it goes away. But whatever excess you have doesn't just melt. The national treasuries melt away each turn. And essentially no diplomacy. A couple miners came in, Hanover and the Palatinate. Palatinate for Holland, Hanover obviously for England, supporting the Prussians there, stacked with them. Then to the economic phase, and you know, it's sort of a crapshoot. I don't think the Russians can win, but they got a real advantage on the Poles in terms of more unrest happening in Poland. And one thing in the Russians' favor, Austria is very reticent to enter this war. They're in it and expect to win and get some points, but they want to see the Polish army destroyed. And they actually want to see the Polish prestige knocked down, because the Poles, well, they're over here, because the Poles have been gathering good points. It's hard to read who's who there because of the sheet covering it, but they're in, you know, one of the leading positions. I think they're in 2nd place after Holland. So they're not going to be a terribly helpful ally. They got called in, but they don't have to actually do anything. They just had to declare war, which doesn't cost much, except that actually costs them some unrest as well, because they are officially at war, even if they're not doing anything. Well, the autumn military stage is a mixed bag. Well, not so much for the Prussians. They marched in, took Holland, successful siege. Zealand's next. We get the automatic surrender, five qualities. Oh, I forgot to deal with my English. They were going to march up. Although I could actually ship another unit into play. I've got, I'll hold off because of that, because getting 3 units to attack is a good thing. Anyway, that was pretty easy. The Dutch fleet is bottled up in Zealand now. They had to escape, running the blockade, as it were, which had it intercepted successfully would have an advantage on the wind gauge. Over on the Polish side, the Russians made an initial advance that looked kind of good, but then the Poles got to strike back and knock this unit apart a little bit. You know, the two are actually fairly evenly matched. When it comes down to it, it's going to be how much Spain throws in. Right now the Spanish have only thrown some Danes into play, which they can afford to lose. But if Poland looks like it's going to get overrun and they lose enough points, I think the Spanish and Austrian armies are going to come flooding in. And that should move us over into the fall turn, where we get the Dutch back over here in Zealand or something. Right, for the autumn military phase, the Dutch aren't presenting any fight whatsoever. They've lost New York up here. They're just, you know, hey, if nobody's gonna help us in the war, we want it over as soon as possible. way well. Then we'll be around for the next one or something. I don't know. I mean, they're really just a target. That's all they are. Getting that far ahead was a way to paint a big bullseye on their back. Over here, though, we see the Poles and the Russians are involved in a fencing match, as it were. The Russians attacked first. Peter pulled here into Volin, and I needed this devastated marker there because there were two battles. He won the first battle, and then the second battle against this dude who reminds me of someone I know, actually, or knew. He had to fall back there. It was both sides broke at the same time. They both lost the same amount of units. There's no indication in the rules of what to do under that. I give the advantage to the defender and say the attacker has to breaks first. So, as is usual in this game, you pull away as soon as you broke. You don't want to keep fighting because if there's any size to the enemy army, he will rout you in that case. And then over here you can see the Russian very small force getting pushed back. That was not a broken force. It's just when you've got a really weak force, the best thing you can do is run away after one round of battle. Actually, you may have to fight 2 rounds. I think I'm screwing that up. Jesus. I'll look that up. The game just does not gel in my head. Anyway, we're at the end of the turn, and I'll see if I've been screwing things up. Like I said, the Dutch aren't fighting at all. They hid in the city and are just taking it as a siege so that they lose the least amount of prestige from it. And then they'll get to do their surrender. Only one territory will have fallen this time, so there's only one territorial demand. That'll probably be New York, out of 2 total demands. So they're just going to continuously get these kind of light pieces on them again and again and again. Been screwing up battle every time. There's a possibility of battles of being actually decisive because it's at the end of the second round that you're allowed to retreat, and I've been retreating at the end of the first round almost consistently. Basically anything that's kind of even an ordinary force without a leader is probably going to take a couple casualties if they're decent sized armies. So we should be seeing more routes than I've been seeing. I'll try to remember that. I know I noted it before and forgot about it. The system is just not terribly intuitive for me. Yeah, you know, you have the in the EU EIA games, you have sort of this combination of military and morale that you're both tracking in each battle, and that's a pain in the ass. You have to keep track of it on paper. But with this, it's just, I don't know, it's just much harder for me to grasp the information on it, maybe because I'm coming with prior assumptions. And the only effect we have in terms of leader losses, Turkey has a new ruler, Ahmed III. No real effect in the game, just another name, essentially valueless sultan. Most of the monarchs in this game have no effect on play whatsoever. Somewhat disappointing factor in the game, but I don't know. As to random events, the French got a pestilence, no biggie there. Austria got an inflation. Again, they probably can't afford many troops anyway with their debt, which they can't do anything about because it's a war turn. Commercial-wise, you know, the big open markets, the value of everything, it's allowed everybody to pay double. The Dutch paid triple. Got like 50 something. Although with 14, they have a 14 structure, so getting to triple costs 42 in and of itself. But they still got a chance to roll for shipping. This is last turn's build, which will be in play next turn. The Dutch had to move first because they're low prestige, so there was less competition in a sense, less targeting against the English than there had been. Cash still going into the Russian and Swedish corporate treasuries so that they can start their own companies. Basically, 3 countries competing at least the way it is right now with the size of the shipping, there looks like there's a lot of room for other companies to start occurring. The fact that we lost 2 companies means that it feels like there's room for people to kind of play around at the edges, as long as they don't get shut down completely. And we lost an English ship due to the high competition role. Okay, for diplomacy, Holland surrenders again, and I gotta tell you, I'm kind of getting very discouraged about the peace rules. It's too easy to surrender. You compare this, first of all, compare this to EU or EIA. In EU, a player, and you can convert this by saying, look, somebody has to, both sides have to accept a surrender, right? If the Dutch surrender, the person they're surrendering to can't just say, yes, I will, you know, here's my demands. That's it. Yeah, they've got to be able to say, yes, here are my demands, or no, here they aren't. And I think that little tweak would help a lot with what I'm talking about. But in EU, both sides have to agree that there's a peace, unless it's a constrained peace. In Empires and Arms, both sides have to agree there's a peace, unless there's a constrained peace. Everything that's possible to prevent a peace from happening should be in place, especially in this era. It was very, very difficult in the Spanish Succession War, for example, for the 2 sides to come up with an equitable peace. Even though they knew the broad format of it and were agreed to it, they just couldn't do it. And here, the Dutch, with very little chance of getting out of this war, you would almost say they're in a position where they should be able to be destroyed, damn near. Yet, as a country, if that were possible, they are in that shape, yet they're able to dictate a very, very light peace each time. In this case, they lost New York and a year's income over the next 3 years. There's just not much more to demand from them. You could demand a big prestige gain. So what's going to happen every single year? We're going to have a war with the Dutch. Now, obviously, I can add that little tweak, and maybe I should, but it's too late now on this one. I don't. And, you know, along with all the other discouragements that I have with this game, maybe it's time to hang it up. I'm moving through it way too slowly. And part of it is, of course, my own life, but part of it is the game itself. It's just not, it's not grasping me. It's not thrilling me the way I had hoped it would. Economically, everything's a mess. Austria, with the depredations coming from the war, they had to reduce their army by about 2/3. They can't fight a war under these conditions. Next turn, they're going to ask for peace. But it's not like the Russian-Polish situation is all that impressive either. You would think, well, Poland just lost a major ally. Well, yeah, but a lot of Polish territory is ripped up cash-wise. Of course, the Russians are in even worse shape, having lost much of their army. They still got Peter's army here, though. So it's kind of up in the air. But Austria just does not see the advantage to trying to wait out this war. And Spain's not in much better shape. They're also concurring with Austria, saying, hey, man, let us out of this. We really do not want to be here. And they can't leave their alliance. They've got a 10-year enforced strong alliance with the Austrians because of the Succession War. Anyway, with the war in Holland over, that makes it very difficult. Nobody can really do anything about Holland at this point. Of course, there's the question, Prussia could conceivably jump into the Polish War if they can convince the English that they want to play in that too. I'll look kind of at the points here. Poland's at 441. That's not that much ahead of England. So, you know, the inclination towards that kind of punishment it seems like that's just going to get in the way of hitting and continually hammering Holland. On the other hand, Prussia has some significant interest in terms of gaining Polish territory, perhaps. Spring turn came with some victorious move. The Poles pushed into Moscow and actually captured it, costing some prestige to the Russians. And they also pushed up against Peter, but they didn't catch him down here in the Ukraine. Now they've taken the Ukraine back, however. Then Peter slipped back up to Moscow and recaptured it. That, I should probably be doing something with those guys too. Uh-oh. The forces look fairly evenly matched right now. Notice Moscow's a fortress, but the Russians didn't pay for it, I'm pretty sure. No way to remember across the amount of time that I play things. This game needs a lot more to help you remember the aspects to it. Anyway, we're pushing into the fall. Like I said, the Spanish and Austrians probably not fighting much. The Danes are part of this Polish force here with the hopes of getting Spain some points, but other than that, not much. Saxons pushing here in to help the Poles. And we push into the 1705 turn. Again, I'm forgetting with the military what I'm supposed to be doing. I am going to play the way I had been about pieces, though. I feel like the rules just don't adequately handle peace. I feel like Holland should not have been able to get away with the cheap surrender. I think the English would have taken it anyhow. The idea there being, hey, they got New York, which they want. That's going to give them an additional buck of income each turn. And it's okay to do a war every turn or every other turn or whatever. They can't do it every military turn, though. They can only do it... Basically, now they're in military stage, so the English can't go back to war with the Dutch until this war ends. Once this war ends and they're in a peace turn, they can do it again. Which, whatever you want to look at it with that. Now, I really do want to try to remember the military situation, because I think the possibility of routes would enhance the excitement of the military conflicts in this game. They're really kind of dull with, well, whoever takes the worst losses in the round just withdraws. And I think I'm misplaying that and have been all along. Well, it's pretty clear from the rules that you're not allowed to withdraw on the first round of after the first round of combat. You have to stick around for 2 rounds. I've seen some battles go that long, but most don't. Most somebody says, I'm broken and I can't get out of there. And I think allowing for those easy early routes is going to make the wars much more decisive when they actually happen. I'm okay with having screwed up so far. All right, time to test out whether that Averio browser works. It's a bitch and a half to use because I have to assemble the movie. Okay, that's what I have to do with any tool. But it assembles it and takes a long time doing it, like 4 hours or something for an hour-long video, in some format that I can't use. Something specific to this, to the software. I can look at it fine on their browser, but I can't upload it and I can't view it with Windows Media Player or anything like that. So then it has a conversion feature. So I can do one of 2 things. I can either convert all the videos first, or I can assemble it first. But I've got to do it in 2 steps. I've got to do both those steps. But it doesn't seem to use as many resources. We'll give it another shot today. I can't be absolutely certain, because the other thing that's a pain in the ass is it's just so much more difficult to access your things and then to delete them, because you have to find them. It saves them in its own little folders, and it's just more irritating to me. All right, let's try putting this up.